Today, what we wanted to talk about is something a little bit different. Is rather than doing our typical fiddle kind of a workshop, we wanted to just kind of dive a little deeper into the whole audio, because for many of us, this is a bit of a mystery, and not only a mystery to us, but also kind of how this relates to people who are playing fiddle specifically and in more traditional fiddle environments. So this is what Audrey does. So, Audrey, I will allow you to do your little bit of your background, and then you can take it away with the PowerPoint. So, thank you, Audrey.
Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and screen share my PowerPoint so that I can make sure that it all works. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation with all of the colors? Ooh. Oh, it's going automatically. Okay, let's see. All right. Just a little bit of background information about me. I'm Audrey Jaber, also known as Charlie Knuth's daughter. And I make my living as kind of mainly as a contra dance and English country dance fiddle player, and do a fair amount of traveling across the country. And I got my degree at Berklee College of Music in music production and engineering because I said, who in their right mind would want to be a performer and be able to make a living as a folk fiddle musician? What? But I absolutely loved the program, and kind of got sucked into actually making my living as a performer. But I have to tell you that having this degree has been so useful as a performer, and being able to have that knowledge to communicate with sound engineers and to be able to do sound engineer work myself and doing live sound. So that's a little bit of background information. A little bit about this presentation. Let's see if I can move on to the next slide, is that there are so many rabbit holes to go down about talking about live sound particular. And so I'm going to do my best to give a very basic overview about things. And so I imagine that there's a broad range of folks here who know a lot about it, don't know anything. And so I'm going to do my best to have the fact that everyone can learn a little bit of something about it. And again, as Mary Pat mentioned, talking about some fiddle specific stuff. So this guide is really meant for musicians, and just having some basic vocabulary and basic understanding about audio, and make it a little bit less scary, because I know, fancy words get tossed around in the audio world, and that can be really intimidating. And so my job here is I like to open that box and make it a little bit less intimidating. So some things that we're going to cover is basic signal flow. Where does sound come from and where does it go? Some key components about live sound: the microphones, some mixing consoles. What the heck is that? Amplifiers and speakers, some common cables and connectors that you'll see, some basic information about EQ or equalizing, feedback, and some basic communication that we can deal with, communication between the musician and the sound engineer at a gig. And finally, I'll go through kind of my personal setup as a fiddler. All right. What is live sound? We're starting at the very beginning, folks. The idea is this is a process of amplifying and mixing sound for an audience during a live event. It's something is a little bit too soft, you have a larger audience, and we want to be able to take the live sound or the sound that you're doing and amplify it. We might want to change the sound of it a little bit, but mainly in the world that we live in, we want to take what we have and make it so that everyone can hear it. And why does it matter to you? And I think I mentioned this a little bit before. It's just having a better understanding of the language and the basic concepts so that we can communicate with the live sound engineer and be able to maybe do some basic troubleshooting. All of a sudden, something's not working. What are the things that I know that I can check? All right, signal flow. So this is the very basic flow of audio during a live sound situation. You have your input. Can you guys see my cursor by any chance? Okay, I'm like, I could use my finger, but that also doesn't work. So I'll use my cursor instead. Is that you have you have your instrument, right? And you have your microphone or your instrument pickup that goes into the mixer. And this is kind of the motherboard, the mothership. And the mixer does all of the audio processing. And then from there, we're going to take that sound and we're going to amplify it. And that amplification then finally goes into your speakers. And generally in live sound situations, you have your main speakers and you have your monitors. And we'll talk a little bit more about that difference later. So this is that very basic setup. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk, we're again talking about some terminology that you might hear tossed around. The first thing I wanted to talk about is this word gain and gain structure. So gain is the, here I am making hand motions that are probably not very useful looking at the slideshow. But when we talk about gain, we're talking about the different stages in which we take our original sound and we boost it to make it louder. So our very first gain stage is when we plug our instrument microphone or our microphone into the mixer and we adjust that level in the mixer. And that's the very first part. And there are other places in the mixer that you can boost the gain, but that's the initial one. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between gain versus volume, because sometimes as a musician, you're like, the volume's not loud enough, or there's in the audio world, there's a difference between gain and volume. So when you talk to a live sound engineer, I think my gain of my instrument needs to be a little bit louder. We're talking about that very beginning of that microphone going into the mixer. And then volume refers to the output, the end result. I need the volume of the speakers to be a little bit louder. This is I don't want to harp a little bit too much, but I just want to give you an idea of when you hear that word gain versus volume. All right. Woohoo! Okay, now the more interesting things. Microphones. Woohoo! All right. In live sound situations, you'll probably come across two different types of microphones, and you'll hear these terms tossed around: a dynamic microphone and a condenser microphone. And some of the overarching details that you need to know about it is that a dynamic microphone is a little bit more durable and really good for live sound stuff and less feedback prone. I've seen dynamic microphones at gigs that are completely dented, smell like beer, and they still work. So they're just really, really durable. And then you have your condenser microphones that are a little bit more sensitive, as in they pick up a bigger frequency range. And most small instrument microphones are condenser microphones and also used for live sound. And the biggest thing that you need to know, I think, is that condenser microphones need phantom power and dynamic microphones don't need phantom power. Phantom power just means it needs a little bit extra voltage. So if you have a condenser microphone, something to communicate to the audio engineer says, hey, I've got a condenser and I need phantom. And the sound engineer will know exactly what you mean by that. What I wanted to show here in this picture is like some of the most frequent microphones that you'll come across, or if you're interested in buying a microphone, these are the things that I would, that I've seen a lot in the past couple of years. Sorry. So you have the Shure SM57. This is a tried and true microphone. It's been around for a really, really long time. Again, this is the one that can be completely dented and smell like beer and still work. Okay, if I touch my mouse, it moves. So I'm not going to touch my mouse is what's going to happen. You also have you have the Shure SM57, and they also make a vocal version of this. This is the 57 is an instrument mic, and the SM58 is the vocal version of it. And literally the only difference is that they have a windscreen, a metal windscreen over it. So that's the only difference between that. So I'm sure if you've done any gigs that you've seen this SM57, tried and true, if you had one microphone that you needed to buy the 57, and it's $99 on Sweetwater. The microphone in the middle is a fiddle or a instrument microphone. And it's actually the one that I use. And we'll talk a little bit more about my setup later. And it's the Audio-Technica Pro 35. It's got a little clip that can go over your fiddle. I've seen saxophone players put it on their bell, and it's a condenser microphone. and I absolutely love it. And you have the one to the right, looks really cool, right? And this is called, the Ear Trumpet Lab is the company, and this is their Myrtle version. And if you've done any fiddle competitions or if you've gone to bluegrass concerts, this has become kind of like the most popular microphone in the folk world. It's a condenser microphone, but it's geared towards multiple instruments to be used at the same time. Not only is it beautiful, but it sounds amazing. And the folks who have made it are folkies themselves, and they've kind of geared it towards our folk industry. It's a condenser microphone. And they've got a bunch of different versions, but if you're interested in a slightly more expensive microphone, easy setup, and you've got two people playing, I would highly recommend looking into it. So something that all three of these microphones have in common is, here's another fancy word. Let's actually talk about fiddle pickups, and then I'll go to the polarity patterns. So fiddle pickups are slightly different than, microphones, and that they pick up the audio in a slightly different way. Some of them use magnets, and here's another fancy word, piezoelectric crystal. So you might have heard of piezo pickups. I've had some over the years, and as opposed to microphones, for fiddlers, you kind of install them on your instrument. The really great thing about them is that you will hardly experience any feedback. So if you're in a really loud rock band, you're playing in grungy, loud bars, this is a really good option because you do not have to worry about feedback. The cons, unfortunately, is that they don't sound as good as the other microphones. You'll need a preamp, so you need something separate to boost the signal. And the best pickups that I have used require a little bit of installation on your instrument. So you can't just take it off and put it on. So if you notice, this Fishman violin pickup actually isn't on your bridge. And so when I got mine installed, I had to go to the fiddle shop, and they fixed the bridge up to match my fiddle. And then that little metal part lives on your fiddle, and you can see the little cable that you plug in there. And same thing with this McIntyre fiddle pickup. This right here fit on my instrument with some putty, which I also didn't love and felt a little weird about it. So I eventually got rid of it, but it sounded actually pretty good. And so these are the two pickups that I've used over the past 10 years and actually enjoy the sound. I went through a period of trying as many pickups as I could because I was in a Celtic reggae rock band for a while. And there are a lot of bad fiddle pickups out there. So
we've got one question for you, Audrey, back on the Audio Technical Pro 35 that clips right onto the fiddle. Where exactly does that clip?
Yep, I'll show you the picture where I put mine on, but it actually lives on my chin rest. So I plug it, I put it on my chin rest, and then I can move the angle of the gooseneck wherever I want. And I'll show you a picture later, but it's an excellent question. Because if you see here, if you notice, it's the same gizmo as with your chin rest. And so that's definitely a little bit more of a permanent install. All right. Polar patterns. So what I mentioned about all of these microphones, what they have in common is that for live sound, having a cardioid polar pattern is kind of the most common thing. I don't want to get into too much detail. And there's tons of different polar patterns, but what it basically means is where is the sound best being picked up by the microphone. So you can see this visual here. If this is the microphone, this is the degrees in which the sound is. So if you've ever messed around with a microphone and you're right here, you're not having it, and it's not picking up anything. Or, and so it's just nice to know that this is the polar pattern, because if you're on the side here and you're not, and you can't be heard, it's just the general rule is that you want to be as close to the microphone and in center as possible. And if you see a microphone that says omnidirectional, that, it means the polar pattern is all across the microphone like that. And those can be really good for recording purposes. but that's not something you want for live sound because again, it's going to pick up sound from everywhere. And in a live sound situation, you want to really have that microphone focused on just you. One, so that mixing can become easier. And again, for sound rejection, for feedback issues. So when you're looking for a microphone, looking for a cardioid pattern is a good one. There's other ones called hypercardioid, which is this, but just a little bit tighter, which is even, which will reject sound in a little tighter, in a tighter fashion. So that. All right, let's talk about mixers. Mixers over the past like 20 years, the technology has changed so much. And there's constantly being changed. And it's such an easy rabbit hole to get in to talk about the nitty gritty about mixers. But what I want to talk about is really the basic functionality of them so that you can apply and understand those concepts so that any mixer you come across, you kind of understand the basics of how they all work. You'll see you have your analog mixers like this that I think look familiar to a lot of people. And then you have your digital mixers like this. And you're like, where are all of the buttons? I need buttons. And a lot of digital mixers, all of this lives basically in a computer. You can see iPads, and it's just amazing what like how much the technology has evolved. But again, and you look at the digital mixers and you look at the iPad, your visuals are going to look very similar to the analog. And so they've designed the digital consoles to look like analog because that's kind of what we all grew up learning and having that basic picture in our head of how we process audio. So don't be intimidated by looking at these digital mixers. So again, like I mentioned earlier, this is where the gain happens, where you have your microphone and you're going to increase that signal from your microphone. You have your processing, and the most commonly used one in our industry is EQ, an equalizer. And then what do we do with that audio, right? And we're going to send that audio out into the world. And on mixers, you'll see AUX, that stands for aux channels, meaning auxiliary. And 9 out of 10 times, that really just means monitors. And that's where we're sending our audio and our sound to our monitors. All right, I wanted to just break down what this mixer channel strip looks like. And again, this is one of the most commonly standard strips that you'll see. And I talked a little bit about it. And so you have at the very top, you have your XLR or your microphone input. So that's where your microphone goes in. If you have a guitar or a line level signal that we'll talk about a little bit later, that's where you would plug it in. So this is where your signal goes into. We're going to skip this. Usually this is if you have like a reverb or something that you would want to plug in, but you're usually not going to deal with that. This is where your gain happens right here. And if you have a line level signal, there's a little pad button here. If you know that your signal is a lot stronger than a microphone, like a guitar or a keyboard, you want to put this pad on, which will, so the board knows kind of what signal it's expecting. And then here you have your EQ buttons, and we'll go in a little bit more detail in a moment. So you have these blue buttons, these red buttons are your auxiliary, your monitors. And so this is where you say, oh, I want this. If this is the fiddle channel, I would love more fiddle in my monitor. This is where you would do it. And this board has 2 different ones. And so if you have 2 speakers on stage facing you, you have your fiddle player who wants more fiddle. You can turn that down or turn it up. And then if the guitar player over here says, I need less fiddle, you would turn it down there. And then these, again, are effects that you generally won't come across. And this is your pan button if you have stereo, left or right. And then this is your output volume. Remember, our gain is here and our volume is here. And this is where you would send the overall volume to your mains. And you've got some mute buttons here and some solo buttons if you want to hear this channel by itself. And every mixer is a little bit different, but you know in this general area is where you can mute or solo listen to it by itself. Amplifiers. The main idea of an amplifier is to increase that audio signal that you have in your mixer, and that's going to drive your speakers because they need so much more. And I don't want to get too much into it, but just know that this is part of that signal flow that we were talking about. Mixer amplifiers can live in 3 different places. They can live by themselves in these units like this. You can have your mixers that have amplifiers built into them, or a lot of times these days, the amplifiers are going to be built into the speakers themselves. And because the technology has evolved so much and things are just getting lighter, a lot of sound engineers have opted to have these amplifiers live in their speakers now. And you can tell, well, how do I know where the amplifier lives in this sound system if you're curious? In the speakers, they're called powered speakers, meaning the amplifiers in there, if they need to be plugged in. So that's just a basic, hey, I know these are powered speakers. And if an amplifier lives in the mixer, they're kind of big and bulky and a lot heavier, and they're kind of more square shaped and a lot heavier. And sometimes they might have a fan in the back. But just something just to take note of. Boring but important. If you do have an amplifier or you're looking to buy an amplifier to match your speakers, there's a lot of technical stuff you need to know about just matching the power and impedance. You just need to make sure that there's some matching. Totally separate conversation, but just something to know that not every amplifier will match the speakers that you have. If someone gave you an amplifier and you have these speakers, you just want to check the compatibility of those. All right, speakers, woohoo! Usually you'll come across 2 main speakers in live sound. You have your main speakers that face the audience, and then you have your monitors that are going to face you. You also have subwoofers that you won't really deal in folk music. You don't have a but if you see a really, really big speaker on the floor facing the audience, that's a subwoofer. As a musician, kind of things that you need to know, or something that you can ask the sound engineer when you have those monitors facing you, you can ask them, how many monitor mixes are there? So for example, so you can know whether or not, if you ask, to increase the fiddle in this speaker, is it going to also increase the fiddle in the other speaker on stage? And again, monitors is most likely where you'll get feedback. I just wanted to show you a picture of, these are the powered speakers. These are QSC K10s that are pretty standard in the industry, and like mid-level price. They're about $800 each, I think. And you can see that where you can plug in from your mixer in the back here. And actually, what's really great these days with a lot of speakers like this, if you just need one microphone, you can just plug a microphone directly into the speaker, and you can kind of switch. Hey, this is just a microphone going in. And those are some speakers. All right, cables and connectors. There's a whole bunch, but the 3 main ones that you're going to come across are your XLRs, and you have 2 different types of 1/4 inch. And this is kind of something that some folks might not know about, is that not all 1/4 inch cables are the same. And if you notice, you've got one that has 1 ring on it, and you have one that has 2 rings on it. And both of these look like headphone jacks. And the one with the 2 rings around it, you might hear it as a balanced cable. And this one is an unbalanced cable. And the biggest thing for you to know is that the balanced cables are the ones that we really use to connect the mixers and the speakers. And they're balanced because they're better for longer distance, and they're much better at rejecting outside noise. And so these are kind of the preferred ones. The unbalanced cable, this one right here, a lot of folks use them just to plug in a very short distance, your electric guitar into your amp that's just 2 or 3 feet away, and it's used for shorter distances. And you might also hear it as an instrument cable. So just something to be aware of. that not all 1/4-inch cables, as they also might call them, are the same. And if you want boring stuff, TRS stands for tip, ring, sleeve, and TS is tip and sleeve. Fascinating, I know. All right, key concepts. Woohoo! EQ. Woohoo! Our hearing is amazing. We hear such a huge range from 20K or 20 hertz to 20K hertz, which is just amazing. And we break it down in the audio industry as low, mid, and high. And this is roughly the frequency range that those are in. And low, we also use as bass, mid-range, mids, high, treble. So those are some words that you might hear thrown around. And on mixers, you'll see it broken down like this. And we saw that on that mixing channel right here. So that middle button, that's 0. If you want to cut, you want to reduce it, you turn it to the left. If you want to boost it, you turn it to the right. And we use EQ to improve sound clarity. So some examples that you might hear or might want to offer to the sound engineer, you can say, wow, my instrument's sounding really muddy right now. Can you cut the low or the mids for my instrument? Or, gosh, I would like to add clarity in my voice. It's just kind of getting lost. Can you boost the treble? Or if just something is sounding tinny, might be another word you hear, you can say, oh, can you boost the mids or the mid range to add a little bit more depth to my instrument? And another thing that might happen is that your instrument might not produce anything lower than 250 or something. And so a lot of times sound engineers will cut the frequencies that don't exist on your instrument so that you know that there's not going to be any rumbling that'll come through your instrument with those frequencies, because those frequencies don't even exist on your instrument. Here's a fun fact if you're interested in what your instrument as a fiddle player, these are the frequency ranges of a fiddle. So your low G is 196 and a high E is 2,637 hertz. And so you can have an idea of what your instrument range is. And your instrument produces higher frequencies than 2,637 because of our harmonics, the harmonic structure. But it's just kind of interesting to know that. And so when you can say, or like A is 440, right? So you can say, oh, my A string is really loud compared to my other instruments. Can you cut around 440? And so being able to communicate to that sound engineer specific frequencies can be really helpful, especially because you're the person who knows your instrument the best, right? And so you can be able to tell the sound engineer what you want. And then here's just, if you're curious, what a frequency response spectrum looks like for a violin just playing. And so you have your loudness, your dB, and here's the frequency range, if you're just curious about what that looks like. Feedback. The bane of musicians and sound engineers' existence. Oh, yeah. So I want to talk about a little bit about like what is feedback and how it happens. It's literally a feedback loop. If you have a microphone, it's picking up sounds that are too loud or at a particular frequency. This it literally creates a feedback loop between the speaker and the microphone, and it just happens so fast and just completely out of control. And that's why it can happen so quickly. And again, you're most likely to happen with your monitors because that is where your microphone and your monitors are at its closest. And this infinite loop. So some reasons why it happens is like there's a particular frequency, like we talked about this right here. If this frequency right here was really hot and it happened to resonate with the speaker, and that frequency is going to be what's feeding back. Or if the volume is just way too loud and everything feeds back. And again, it happens most often when a microphone is too close to a speaker. So some ways to prevent it. Be as close to your microphone as possible. If this is your vocal mic or your fiddle mic and you're here, you have much more chance of more sound coming in, or the engineer has to boost your microphone level loud enough so that you're heard, but that will also increase all other sounds. So being as close to your microphone, you might hear the term, eat your microphone. That's what they're talking about. Eat it. And then making sure that your microphone is away from the monitors and speakers as possible. Again, because our live sound microphones are cardioid, that definitely helps that. But don't accidentally, swivel your microphone facing the monitor, and that's definitely in danger. And again, we love as sound engineers to have the volume on stage as low as possible. Because if you just keep turning everything, one, your ears are going to get really tired from how loud the monitors are, but it just increases the chances of feedback. So if feedback happens and the sound engineer is going, trying to figure out what can you do as a musician to prevent, to make it stop. One, if you notice your microphone got, faced the monitor, or you're close to a speaker, move the microphone away from the speaker as much as possible. And if you have a mute on your instrument, mute as quickly as possible. And so that'll help the sound engineer can figure out which microphone is feeding back. And another tiddly bit, if it's not quite on the verge of feedback, but something that you can communicate to a sound engineer, is that sometimes if you're doing your monitor mix and you're listening and there's this whoa sound, or there's just something that just doesn't feel right, or there's something, it sounds a little echoey, but it's not, it's not quite feedback. Basically, that monitor is on the verge of feedback. Or you're playing your instrument and there's that one note that's way louder than everything else. Letting the sound engineer know, saying, hey, this is not feeding back, but can you take a listen to this monitor? And they'll be able to figure out, okay, it's just too loud, or, oh gosh, I hear again, your G string is just resonating with the speaker. We're going to cut, 196 hertz on your instrument so that we can prevent that feedback from happening. No matter what, feedback, unfortunately, is a reality in our lives, and we do our best to prevent it. But also protecting your ears. If you're hearing feedback and you don't know what to do, close your ears, because protecting your hearing is also very, very important. Or just walking away is also totally appropriate, which I've had to do a couple of times. Communication is key, not only in life, in general, but for when you're doing a gig with a sound engineer. And so I just wanted to give you some tiddly bits of how to make sure you can have the best relationship with the sound engineer and make sure the gig goes as well as possible. So before the gig, one, know your setup and understand it as best as possible. For me, my microphone is part of my instrument now because I've used it so much, but I know how it sounds and I know how it works and how I want it to sound. If you're a caller or a singer, your microphone is also your instrument because each microphone is different and you know how your voice sounds with your microphone. So just kind of understanding that, making sure everything works. If you have batteries, make sure you have batteries that are charged. It's just a professional thing to do. Another thing that sound engineers love is if you have a stage plot. And so I gave some examples here on the side of what they can look like, but it's just basically letting your sound engineer know as much information as possible in advance. So there's little last minute shifting around. And so for this one, they're listing all of the microphones that they need and who they belong to, and then where each person stands and what instrument. When you're at the gig, show up with plenty of time for setup and sound check. Showing up 5 minutes before you start causes not only you stress, but the sound engineer stress. And I love, the first couple of tunes that you're playing are always going to be a little bit of adjustment, but the more time you have ready, the more relaxed you can be. And that just makes such a big difference. And worst case, you show up a little too early and then you have time to relax or chat or play a couple tunes for fun because you finished your sound check early. Another thing, be patient. There's always something going on with sound and there's always something to troubleshoot. And so just understanding that they're doing their best. And a lot of sound engineers, a common way of doing a sound check is testing one instrument at a time, right? And so they might ask, hey, band, I know you're warming up, but do you mind if we go one by one? I just want to make sure the level is correct and you're hearing what you want to hear. And so a lot of times you'll go down the row one at a time so they can get the level and the balance and EQ, and then have everyone play at the same time so they can balance it, in all of the instruments. And then how to communicate your needs for your monitors. We talked a little bit about that EQ, and like try to be as specific as possible. Not, I can't hear myself, or everything's too loud. You can communicate, hey, this is sounding really boomy. How about turning down the mids or the bass, stuff like that. There's a common phrase in the industry where a lot of musicians will say, more me, please, more me. And before you request more me, or I can't hear myself, a lot of times it's not necessarily that you need more of yourself, but you might need less of somebody else. So before asking for more of you, try to listen carefully to the monitors to figure out whether or not, oh, wow, the guitar is actually a little too loud. Okay. And so a lot of times, if I'm not hearing everything, I will request to lower another instrument, see if that works. And if it doesn't work, then I will ask for a little bit more me. But again, our goal is to have the monitors as quiet as possible while we can still hear each other, so that they're not blasting our ears and potentially causing more feedback. So just a tip of, if you can't hear yourself, maybe ask for something less before asking for more. At the end of the gig, thanking your sound engineer. They are always the first people to show up to the gig and the last people to leave. And having done live sound for years and now being on the other end, they have a tough job. They really have a tough job. And so thanking them personally, or reminding the organizers to thank the sound engineers on the microphone, is always a good thing. And another like quirky tidbit is, while they're cleaning up, maybe just double check and ask their permission to help cleaning up before doing it. Some sound engineers have very specific ways of coiling their cables, or they have a way that they want. And so just asking in advance if they would like help, I think, is always a useful thing before jumping in, or moving your instruments as quickly off stage as possible so that they can go in and start cleaning up and not have to worry about your instruments being in the way. It's another way that you can help.
So we do have a question in the chat, and it says, the balance you hear in the monitor is or is not what the audience hears in the speakers?
Oh, such a great question. Nowadays, 9 out of 10 times, it is not what's going into the main speakers. And so back in that channel strip that we saw, those auxiliary buttons, that will control the individual level going into your monitor. There's a really annoying thing called pre or post mix. You might see a button on a mixer that says pre, and pre means pre-large fader, which means it's pre-main speakers. And so professional systems these days will always have, the mixes will be different than the mains. If you have and that's why I said 9 out of 10, if you have a really old system, sometimes you don't have a choice, but more often than not, it'll be separate.
Okay.
Like, so yeah.
Sorry. So you can't tell what the audience is hearing, and you should not worry about that. Even if in your monitors, you're hearing lots of guitar, for example, in the bands I play, I probably would not ever recommend lowering another instrument. I think that would cause some disturbance.
Well, so Teresa, that's actually the point. And that's actually why you asked whether or not you have separate monitor mixes. Okay. Because if you have one monitor mix, then yes, having to negotiate with your other bandmates. That's an excellent question.
Right. Thank you. I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but yeah, thank you.
No personalities. That's absolutely a thing. And asking to move the speaker, a little bit closer to you or farther away. If something's just too loud, you can move your body away from the monitor, or ask if you can move the monitor slightly away from you. Could also be an option.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I was going to give you an example for a lot of contra dance and English gigs. I don't want to hear the caller in my monitor mix. They are instructing the audience, and I want to focus on the music. So a lot of dance bands, we have our monitor mix without any talking in it, which can be a little bit distracting sometimes. And so that's a really important thing, to have a separate monitor mix than what's going out in the audience. And again, what you're hearing, like you might hear some slapback of the main speakers and it might sound not right to you, but you're not hearing the main speakers as the audience. And so it's best not to worry about the main speakers. You could take turns if you have, multiple members in your band. You can say, hey, Jerry, can you go out in the hall and just take a quick listen? Does it sound too loud? Does it sound too soft? And based on your relationship with the sound engineer, you can gently say, hey, wow, this sounds a little bit louder than I'm used to. Or, wow, the way that we usually mix our band, the guitar is a little bit softer. Can you take a listen? And so it's all about negotiating and not being,
diplomacy. Yeah.
Diplomacy is real. Diplomacy is real. And sometimes there's things that the sound engineer doesn't have control over. The acoustics of the hall makes such a big difference about how things sound. And sometimes they just don't have control over it. If everything just sounds so boomy and you look out in the hall and they're all reflective surfaces or they're all windows, there's just things that the sound engineer can't control with their environment.
We've got another question in the chat about cable ends.
Yeah.
And the question is, we thought one with two was stereo and one was mono. Can the jacks with two be used on anything?
Yes, they can be. They can be both stereo or balanced. That extra sleeve can be a ground as opposed to stereo. So they're flexible in that way. And grounding means they are able to reject external noise. All right. I think that's what I had for communication. And again, I think Teresa put it best as diplomacy is key, is being able to learn how to communicate gently what you need. And the more specific you are, I think the more helpful it is to the sound engineers. All right, Audrey's set up. Woohoo! As someone who loves technology and talks about it a lot, I live by the KISS principle. I don't know if you know what that means. And not to be vulgar, but it means keep it simple, stupid. Because I'm all about the less points of failure, the better, especially in new situations. So I, again, try to keep my setup as simple as possible. And because I travel so much, I like to keep it compact. And so I use the Audio-Technica Pro 35. And I think I paid $149 for it. So it's very much on the cheaper end of microphones, but it is so durable. I'm not the gentlest, gracefulest person in the planet. And I'm pretty rough with my stuff. And so durability for me is key. I'm stepping on my microphone cable while I'm walking around stage. And this thing is tried and true. I've had it for 10 years and it is amazing. I used a DPA. I can't remember the exact number, model number of it, which is 4 times as expensive. Sounds maybe slightly better, but the cable is so tiny and the point of failure, someone accidentally put their chair on the cable and that was kaput. And so I'm very much, I can't speak highly enough about the Audio-Technica. And as you see in this picture, you see where it clips onto my shoulder rest, or my chin rest, excuse me. And so that's where it goes. And over the years, I've experimented where the gooseneck lives. I have it kind of more or less directly over the center between the tailpiece and the bridge. If you want a little bit more boomier sound or more depth, you can experiment moving it closer to your G string or closer to this F hole. Or if it's too boomy, you need a little bit more high end, you can experiment moving the microphone closer to your E string or to this F hole. So it just takes a little bit of experimentation. And if you have a few minutes with a sound engineer before a gig, you might ask them, hey, I'd love to experiment with my microphone placement. Do you mind being an extra pair of ears so that I can hear what this looks like or what it sounds like? And I would love your feedback as well. But that's kind of more or less where I've settled on my microphone. And again, because it's so small, the rejection pattern is really kind of amazing. And so I've rarely had any feedback issues with this microphone. But again, you want to make sure that you point it down, not out this way. So you see how it's directly perpendicular. with my instrument.
So I have two questions in the chat on that. And one is, do people hear you breathing when you're doing this? And the other is, do you also use a pickup with this?
Yeah. So excellent questions. No, you don't hear me breathing. Because it's facing that down. If I had it facing a little bit towards me or putting it away from me, I think that you would be able to hear me breathe. But because I have it just, it's almost touching the strings, not quite. And so again, the closer your microphone is to your instrument, the less likely you'll be able to hear any outside noise. My first record with the Free Raisins, we did a live CD where we did like 12 gigs, and I mixed and released the CD, and I was able to do a really good job mixing, or because there was so much rejection noise wise with this microphone and no breathing. You could hear me one time saying an expletive, or I said a word that I shouldn't have said really loudly because I broke a string. So if you yell, you'll be able to hear that.
Kind of an additional one was when you play for Dancer, does the room noise get amplified too? I think you're kind of answering that you're saying it doesn't.
It doesn't, because again, it's the way that it's pointing. I don't know do you see my me as well as the PowerPoint? I have my microphone out here as well, but it's pointing directly down to my instrument and just, very, very close to my strings. And so the farther the microphone is away from your instrument, the more audience and dance noise you'll pick up.
And do you also have a pickup on your fiddle, or are you just using the system? Okay.
So you'll see here on this is that I have that LR Bags or Fishman. I can't remember which one I have. They're basically the same thing attached to my instrument, because at the time of this picture, I was also in a very loud band that required this pickup right here. So you see that it's part of the bridge, and then I had to install it right here. It worked really well for those gigs. And once I stopped playing with that band, I kind of got annoyed at it, or it adds weight to your instrument, and it will affect the tone of your instrument because you have another thing clamped on it. So after a few years of not using it, don't recommend this, but I literally took scissors and snipped it off right here and then removed this bit. So I had this little dingle dongle on my bridge for a few years before getting the bridge finally replaced. Rodney Miller, who is a fiddle player who plays a lot for contra dances, he uses something very similar to this, where he actually plugs in both of these because he's a little hard of hearing now. What he does is he uses this pickup here, and that's what goes to the monitors. And so that, because he has to have his monitors loud enough and without causing feedback. And so he'll use his pickup to go into the monitors, and he uses the microphone to go out to the audience, because the microphone does sound a little bit better than the pickup. And then the other thing here is you'll see this Orchid Electronics microphone mute. And here I'm holding it. If you can see a picture or the video of me, it's about this big. And again, super durable, and it's a microphone mute. And I can't tell you how many times this has come in handy for me when I have to tune in between sets and I don't want everyone to hear me tuning. Or again, I'm hearing feedback. This push button, I just push my foot on it to mute it. And if it's my instrument that's feeding back, it'll instantly cut it off. But this is so helpful. And I can't recommend, if you're doing a lot of gigs, having a microphone mute. There's a little bit of a learning curve to it. You have to remember to unmute yourself once you mute yourself. Right. So that's the only issue, that there's a little bit of a learning curve. This one has a light on it. This is phantom powered because my microphone needs phantom power. This also needs phantom power as well, which it supplies both, so it's not a big deal. But it has a little red light. So when red light is on, I know that it's muted. And then when the light is off, then it's very confusing. The light switch on means the mute is on. And be careful. There's a lot of different models and brands that do mute switches like this. And sometimes a light means other things. And so you just want to know, and again, it comes down to learning your own system and being comfortable with it. But if you're doing a lot of gigs, man, I really can't recommend having a microphone mute more. And this one's Orchid Electronics. I think it's based in the UK, but there are other versions you can buy here in the US as well.
So a question on how does that plug in to the system?
Excellent. So I'll show you real quickly. So I have the end of my microphone, my Audio Technica, and this is the male, and I can plug it into the female end here. And then this output here, this is where your XLR going into the mixer goes. And so all you need to ask the engineer is, I just need an XLR with phantom power, please. And that's all that you need to ask the sound engineer. So this is what gets plugged into the mixer. That's an excellent question. Yeah, that's kind of my setup. And again, I don't have my pickup anymore because I don't need it, and it added a little bit of weight to my instrument, and it changed the tone of my fiddle that I didn't love. And so I'm now back to just using a microphone. And it's fabulous. I don't know if you can tell also at the end of this is not a tech thing, but I have a D'Addario tuner down here, and I bet a lot of you know what that is. But if you don't, it's been another lifesaver. You're in a loud environment and I need to tune my instrument. I can't quite hear myself by myself. I put my mute switch on, turn that button on, and do a quick tune. And it's been, yeah, an absolute lifesaver. So yeah, I think that's it. I've been talking at y'all for almost an hour. I was like, oh, this will just take a half hour. This is no big deal. No big worries.
That's good. Well, obviously people are engaged because you've got a couple of questions. There was one more. If you would clarify, if you have a preamp, how the mute is plugged in.
Yeah, right. And so a preamp is used if you have, again, you have a pickup and you need to boost the signal, or you have a guitar or a keyboard. And so what a preamp does is that there's two types of signals that can go into a mixer. You have a line level signal and a microphone signal. And a line level, and they're just two very different levels of gain needed. And so a preamp will take something really soft and boost it up to a line level so that you can plug it into a mixer. So anytime that you have a pickup, having a preamp, a little box beforehand, is super useful. If you play the keyboard, an organo electric guitar, or if you have a pickup on your acoustic guitar, having a preamp to boost that signal so that the mixer can handle that signal appropriately is a really good idea. I don't have any particular recommendations. LR Bags is a very popular brand to have for pickups or preamps. You might also hear them as DI boxes is another term for them.
Okay.
And I don't have a preamp because I have a microphone. So and so I wouldn't. And actually, a lot of preamps, is it both LR Bags and Grace preamps? You can buy these boxes now that come both with a preamp and a mute switch combined. And so I've seen a lot of musicians with that and a tuner in it. So it's this one big unit with a mute switch, tuner, and a preamp. And a mandolin player in my band uses it, and it's like, it's amazing. I'm going to see if I can just pop that into, it's the LR Bags Venue, and I'm just going to pop that link in the chat so you can take a look at it. And it just
a DI box is a preamp? Did you say? Oh, okay. All right.
This is a really big, ugly looking link, but it takes you to Sweetwater. And this is kind of the main one that I've seen musicians use. Oh, and it has a boost as well. And so if you're taking a sick guitar solo, you can press the boost button and it'll increase your volume a little bit so you can be a little bit louder.
And we had one more question, and that was about how more information on how to identify the gain versus volume. Did you have anything more specific, Teresa? We do have a minute.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned a few times.
Right.
So what does the conversation look like? Like, I'm hearing not enough gain. Do you hear not enough gain?
Right. Yeah. And so a couple instances that I can imagine is actually if you're hearing distortion, if your microphone is distorting, this is kind of, I think, where you would use this conversation is that your gain at the very beginning is too low. And so they're having to compensate in other places in that signal flow. And it's really distorting, or it's too loud at that point, or your gain was way too high at the beginning. So if you're hearing a lot of distortion, or it's just like way too soft, you can say, hey, can you check the gain? Can you check the gain of my fiddle microphone? As opposed to volume.
I think a lot of sound people, they're looking at they're already kind of doing it, and I don't know they're doing it, probably,
Right.
In my world.
Possibly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want another class, just the same thing, only like one next step up.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done live sound it's been a handful of years, but it's come in such handy being able to troubleshoot also of just like something's not working. How do I communicate this to the audio engineers? Or again, knowing my setup and knowing what I like, and just having sympathy for sound engineers, and just trying to be patient with them, has really made a big difference. And another thing that we didn't talk about at all is that, recording and sound engineering in, home studio recording is a totally separate topic, and different ways of looking at it as well. So that's a completely different topic as well. But yeah.
Sounds good. Well, it does sound like we have a part 2 and a part 3 and
Part 10.
part 4. Yeah. The sequel.
I do have some books. If you're like really nerdy and you really want to dive deep into the nerdiness of this, this was my college handbook, the Sound Reinforcement Handbook, written by Yamaha. And it's oh man, if you need to know anything about anything and you like nerdy stuff, this is the book for you. And then if you're interested in like the electronic side about it, this was a book I was obsessed with for a while. It's Teach Yourself Electricity and Electronics. And again, this is a totally, if you're down the rabbit hole of wanting to really understand, how does this microphone work? How do coils and magnets make like sound? What? This is a really good book for understanding kind of the science behind it.
Well, wonderful. Any other questions? We've got a couple of thank yous in the chats, and I think Teresa made a comment early on about what was it about? This is why you need a good sound engineer.
Right.
Also, yeah. I just put my email in the chat. If you ever have any questions specifically, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. And this is the other side issue, is that a lot of times our sound engineers are volunteers, and they didn't go get a 4-year degree in this, and that they're just doing their best. And so kind of understanding that also, and that's why being able to communicate your needs specifically might be very helpful for them, because they might not really know what they're doing, and they just got shoved into the position because there was nobody else willing to do it, and they had a car big enough to lug the sound. And they're not getting paid, So again, it's just being as sympathetic towards them as possible.
Right.
That sounds like every person at every church that has to run technology.
Right.
That's an excellent description.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
They have a great heart, and they're available on Sundays in a car.
Right, exactly. And they know how to turn a microphone on. And like sometimes that's what you have to do. And you have to be flexible as a musician. I've done gigs where the sound engineer couldn't figure out how to get the monitors, figured out. And I was like, you know what? I just have to do my job, and I'm going to concentrate on making the best possible music I can, given the not ideal situation. And sometimes that's what you need to do. And so being able to let that go and just do your best to do your job despite the chaos around you.
Yeah, you've just described most of my gigs. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, thank you. That was
Yes.
great.
Well,
Wow.
that's why it's so helpful to have someone like Audrey who it's like this is not sound engineering because you're in a rock band. This is a sound engineering when you're in our world, right? Because that's
Yeah.
a whole nother, that's a whole nother beast. So really appreciates to have someone like you, Audrey, who also knows all the technology, but also appreciates, how a traditional musician wants to be heard and what kind of environments we're in and what kind of situations we're in. And yeah, this has been very helpful. So any more questions for Audrey? Yay, thank you. Thank you so much, Audrey.